Good afternoon and welcome to CIPR TV on Wednesday the 4th of May, live at 5. My name's Stephen Waddington and I'm joined in the studio by a new CIPR TV presenter, David Singleton, Associate Editor of PR Week.
Hi. Today is the last day before polling in the national and local elections in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, the local elections in England and the referendum on voting reform throughout the UK. We're talking to a panel of top public affairs practitioners about the conduct of the campaigns, the possible outcomes and how this might affect the political landscape.
All three of our panel members have been named among the top 100 UK public affairs professionals by Total Politics magazine. John Lehal is founding director of Insight Public Affairs, a former political advisor and parliamentary candidate. Simon Goldie is head of external relations at LexisNexis and a political blogger. And Iain Anderson is director and chief corporate counsel of Cicero Group and chairman of the CIPR Public Affairs Group, as well as a former journalist and political advisor.
If you have a question, please submit it via the box on your screen or follow the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag #CIPRtv. Now, as I said a moment ago, national and local elections are taking place across Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, Simon, public affairs activity is now as devolved and distinct as the parliaments and assemblies across the UK are. How has this changed the way the industry works?
One of the biggest changes we've seen is that you get people who are dedicated to looking after a regional part of the UK, so whichever area it is, and you didn't have that 20 years ago. But other than that, the principles of communication professionals stays the same. So you have to understand the policies, you understand the people, what they're trying to achieve and work with them. I suppose there is a couple of opportunities as well. You get the chance to act as a facilitator between the regions and also between the centre and the region. You wouldn't have had that before. And the other thing that is a great opportunity for public affairs professionals is that you can build cross-party consensus. So you can take an issue and sort of de-partisan it, if you like, if that's a word. And if you get cross-party consensus, you've got much better chance of success.
OK, and Iain, perhaps you could give us an idea of the possible outcomes in Edinburgh.
Well, I think Alex Salmond has a smile on his face. At the start of the campaign, and this has been a very long campaign in Scotland, David, it's been about 6-7 weeks. I think they're getting rather exhausted now too, a bit like the electorate. I spoke to many within Scottish Labour and they said don't believe the polls at that point. That had Labour 10 points ahead of the Nationalists. Those polls have flipped. The Nationalists are now ahead. We are basically hurtling towards a bit of a repeat outcome of the last election, probably more SNP seats, an SNP minority administration. But the big change is Tories are actually going to do quite well. They're going to hold on to their own. But we're probably going to see the Lib Dems do very, very badly in Scotland. So that national picture continues. It perhaps takes the smile off Ed Miliband's face nationally, because I think in the rest of the UK, he's going to do quite well.
So I've got a follow-up here from Jane Wilson, just come into the studio. For you, Iain, are the Nationals capitalising, do you think, on not being part of the AV bum fight? And do you think we can expect more voters in the nations to turn their backs on the three main political parties?
Well, Alex Salmond plays a very different card, the nationalist card in Scotland. Clearly, he gets cut through into the debate because he's not part of the coalition conversation. And I think that's working effectively for him. Certainly, all signs right now is that Scotland is going to have the highest turnout, perhaps even close to 50%. OK, moving on to John. What are the chances of an upset in either Cardiff or Belfast this week, would you say?
Well, taking Cardiff first, you've got to remember that we've just coming out of a rainbow coalition. You've had Labour and the Welsh Nationalists have been running the Welsh Assembly government for the last 4 years. That actually has worked very well if you think of the progress they've made on things like tuition fees for people in Wales, social care prescriptions. They've made good progress. You've had the transition of power from Rhodri Morgan, the First Minister, to Carwyn Jones. Looking at the elections, though, the question is, will Welsh Labour get past that key 30-seat number that they need to have a majority in the administration? The Welsh Labour Party were at one point in the campaign very keen to stress that they were going to get a comfortable working majority, have been downplaying expectations a little since. Again, like Scotland, you know, the Welsh Liberal Democrats currently only have 6 seats in the Assembly. They're likely to be down there, probably going to see the first Green member elected in the Assembly there. But overall, I think, you know, the First Minister post the elections will continue to be Colin Jones. I think it will be a case for him to decide how he goes it alone in terms of how close he gets to that 30 mark in case he doesn't pass it and the maths is stacked up in such a way that may be a challenge for him. But I think Labour should be home and dry there. In terms of Northern Ireland, well, no surprises, because the nature of the Good Friday Agreement means that you've got the power sharing agreement between the 5 parties. The Democratic Unionists will continue to be the largest party with Peter Robinson as First Minister, and Martin McGuinness and Sinn Féin will continue to be the Deputy First Minister. I think kind of looking, you know, where we would want to be in 5 years' time is maybe not in a position where you've just got all 5 parties around the table, but maybe that you do have an opposition and a government in the form of the executive there, and I think that's kind of the watch this space, if you like, in Northern Ireland.
We're getting lots of questions coming through about the coalition and the role of the Lib Dems, and particularly Clegg. Simon, I want to turn to you now and ask if there's a significant reduction in Lib Dem councillors in England, is that going to put pressure on Nick Clegg's position, do you think?
Well, arguably, Nick Clegg is under pressure already. I mean, if you see what's been going on in the last few weeks, people are setting out their stalls for possibly being leader in the future, certainly trying to shift Clegg to be very clear about the difference between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. Will there be a contest by the party conference? I suspect not. I mean, firstly, who would want the job right now? So people will wait a bit. And it's a kind of longish game for them. They'll want to build up to get to the point where they could challenge Clegg. Now, tactically, that may be a terrible mistake, because Clegg's got a strategy which says, you know, the economy's going to turn around, people are going to start thinking actually the coalition's pretty good. He's going after what he's called the radical centre. So if you can build that electoral base, start to do well, party activists and members may think, well, actually, this has been such a bad mistake after all. We didn't like it, we've had some problems. And so those people who have been saying, well, you know, we really don't like it, we've got to go hard against the Tories, may be rather isolated in a few years' time. Now, that's lots of ifs and buts, and if it's a leadership contest next week, you know, but I think, you know, don't write Clegg off just yet.
So Iain, if I could ask you a live question in from Ed Roddis here, who asks, it says Lib Dems face the prospect of a double whammy. If they lose council seats en masse, and if they lose the AV vote as well, what would you advise Clegg to come out and say on Friday morning?
Well, if those two things happen, and both of those two things look like they're likely to happen on Friday, I think he has to reassert his leadership within the Liberal Democrat Party, and quickly. I mean, I've already heard this afternoon some people are manoeuvring quite overtly, I think, for his job. He needs to say, set a direction for the Liberal Democrats within the context of the coalition. I mean, I do believe this idea of the Liberal Democrats walking out of the coalition, frankly, is just not doable in terms of credibility for them right now. The chances of it are significantly higher. The chances of 1 or 2 cabinet ministers flouncing out of number 10 in a Heseltine-like way are higher now than they were 4 weeks ago. But I think that would be a death rattle for the Liberal Democrats. So what he has to do is assert his leadership, set a clear direction, and ensure that his party sees that he's extracting more from the coalition, and therefore more from Cameron than he is at the moment.
In the interest of balance, can we ask let's ask the same question. If the Conservatives do badly in the local elections, is that going to cause problems for Cameron?
No, I mean, remember the context here. You know, the Tories are at a very, very high watermark in terms of local government seats, and they will still remain in control of the LGA by Friday. They would need to have a cataclysmic loss in seats, which I don't really see happening, for them to lose control of local government, given the high watermark that we're at. And as I said before, Annabel Goldie's done rather well in Scotland. She's kind of cut through in the same way that Alex Salmond has. The Tories are going to do quite well in Scotland, and I think they're going to have quite a significant influence on a minority nationalist government.
Mm-hmm. OK, well, moving on to Labour. John, do you think Labour is going to do well enough for those party members, and there's a few of them who voted for Ed Miliband? Is he going to do well enough to make them feel that they didn't make a mistake in voting for him?
Well, I mean, I guess, again, it will depend on what the outcome is on Friday morning. And, you know, if you think that hopefully he'll have some positive news in Wales, some good results in local government, you've got to remember that when these seats were last contested in 1997, it's at that point where we were saying bye to Blair and hello to Brown, and it wasn't a particularly good set of results for Labour. So certainly Labour should more than easily be able to kind of win back another 500 seats, win control of some significant councils. So, you know, you're guaranteed some nice headlines there. But obviously, strategically, he's made a pretty fundamental error in terms of coming out so clearly on the AV referendum in support of that. And obviously, kind of, you know, Scotland, what happens there in the event that Labour fails to win? And, you know, Ed Miliband's only been up there twice, so he'll have to take some responsibility himself personally for the results. In terms of what the reaction from the party is, well, you know, I think even through the tough times of Brown, you know, we didn't ditch our party leader. So I don't think there's any talk of that. But I think what the expectations will become from within the Parliamentary Labour Party is that he needs to start surrounding himself with more strategists. I think he's got this policy review ongoing. He's got the likes of Maurice Glassman doing his piece of work. But I think he needs the kind of people that Blair had around him, you know, the Mandelsons, the Alistair Campbells, the Philip Goulds, Pat McFadden's, those kind of people. The team that he's got around him is advising him on a regular basis. And I think that's the challenge for Ed Miliband post these elections, is to get his own house in order in terms of that.
More broadly, and in terms of the coalition, and perhaps each of you could answer this one in turn, what do you think the impact of the elections and the coalition is going to be on the referendum?
Well, I think, yeah, I think, you know, as far as the Lib Dems are concerned, they will really feel the heat from the leadership point of view. You can have more seething masses in terms of their councillors who will have lost their seats. You'll have an increasing number of MPs who are questioning, you know, the fact that the prize goal, you know, I remember when the Lib Dems used to say we're not going to consider anything in terms of going into coalition unless we get proportional representation, and they're effectively going to lose that opportunity. So they will be questioning what they're getting out of this coalition. And I think they will therefore be seeking to get far more in terms of policy and therefore the opportunities for the public affairs community, whether you're a private sector, a voluntary organisation, but certainly to be using those opportunities to gain concessions, whether it's pieces of legislation that are going through Parliament, whether those opportunities within government. And so to certainly the Lib Dems will be key to watch there in terms of what they can establish, what they can get from the coalition, particularly as you start moving towards a redraft of the coalition agreement, which there seems to be much talk about at the moment.
Simon?
I agree with almost everything John said. I'd say that there's an inverse rule that says that the lower the Lib Dems are in the polls, the more likely they are to stay in the coalition. Because where are they going to go? What are they going to do? So I think that's very important to bear in mind throughout all of this. They do have a choice, though, and I think, again, what Iain was saying, you know, if Clegg shows leadership, if he's very clear, if they can hold their nerve, then they can do relatively well out of all this over the 5 years. But if they can't do that, if they carry on throwing, you know, toys out of prams all the time, the electorate won't like it and they will be punished. So I think they do have some big choices to make over the next few months.
Completely agree with that. I think, though, that you get to, you know, a long, hot summer awaits all of us, and particularly the Lib Dems. As I said before, I think there's less pressure on Cameron. Cameron's been the poster boy in the end for the AV campaign. He's thrown enough meat to his party to show he's got the right kind of instinctive credentials to lead the Conservative Party. So they're happy with that. I think for the Lib Dems, you have two factors when we get to the party conference. Number one, lots of former councillors that no longer have status and income. That's kind of important in this job as well, isn't it? And then secondly, a lot of Lib Dem purists whose, you know, abiding attachment to being a Lib Dem is electoral reform. Now that prize may have been swept away for a generation, and I think the Lib Dem conference, in the context that you set, David, is going to be a very, very interesting week for all of us.
And I think the third thing that I would add to that is that the Lib Dems, unlike Labour and the Conservatives, haven't quite learnt the art of stage management of their party conference, being the democratic party they are. And therefore every opportunity for that former council leader, for that councillor, for that party member, that failed parliamentary candidate, to be making a really tough time for the party leadership at the spring conference, at the party conference, and also at the spring forum.
Okay, so we've had a live tweet in from Philip Sheldrake, one of the CIPR TV team. Hello, Philip. He asked, I don't know if any of you've seen Channel 4's fact check campaign.
Some of it, yes.
So he asks, has that helped debunk campaign untruths? Do you want to take that, Sam?
Yes, I think it has, but I think lots of people have been pointing out what's been said and then what might be the reality. And I have to say the AV campaign on both sides hasn't really covered itself in glory at all. And I think, I mean,
we've got more on that.
Right. The electorate really weren't that excited by it, and I think when they heard some of the arguments put forward, they were thinking, you know, hey, you know, it doesn't quite resonate, doesn't quite make sense. And I tell you, it's both sides, I think, got it wrong. And so I think, you know, things like Fact Check and others have come forward and said, look, actually, it's this, it's that.
Well, actually, we could see that from the start, Sim. We as CIPR PA, we hosted a debate between the yes and the no campaign right at the start of the campaign. The most impressive people in the room were my members. The people from the campaigns were dreadful, and I think broadly the campaigns have been dreadful.
Okay, so you've blown one of my questions, which is next. Which side in the referendum debate has run the most successful campaign? You already said it's been very negative.
It's got to be the no campaign, a very, very effective negative campaign, not about the issues, essentially really about saying to principally Conservative voters, but very effectively with Labour too, you'll never see a Conservative government elected on its own ever again if you vote yes. And I think that's also worked for Labour too. So not really about the merits or demerits of AV, but of a brilliantly effective negative political campaign.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think the Yes campaign have always been on the back foot. They've been on the defensive since the start of this campaign. And, you know, at a time when we're trying to change the status quo, I feel that they have failed to make those arguments that resonate, that narrative they haven't quite captured. They haven't captured the mood of the nation. You know, some of the arguments about making MPs work harder, expensive scandals, you know, that's a story that's kind of been and gone, and that's, you know, the headlines of 18 months ago. So I feel that the Yes campaign really just missed an opportunity here. And although there's been some very spurious facts, figures and approaches from the No campaign, they've had the muscle of the Conservatives helping them. But, you know, at the end of it, yes, the Lib Dems will be left asking themselves, well, how did we end up in this position? And how did we lose this?
Okay, if it is off the agenda for the foreseeable future, Andy Walker asks, again, live tweet in, if it does go down, is it off the agenda forever then?
I don't think we'll see any talk of electoral reform for another generation, if assuming that there'll be a vote.
I think the only thing that changes that is if turnout is so low.
What's so low?
Well, I think, you know, below, really below 20%, that the whole legitimacy of the thing can be questioned by those that are in favour of electoral reform. To say actually 80% of people didn't bother to vote. So frankly, we've got to do that, do this all over again. But doing this all over again certainly doesn't happen in the context of the current Parliament.
I'm not sure if it is off the agenda. I mean, it's certainly not going to come on in the next 5 years. But there are some arguments about why first past the post is so good. It doesn't lead to coalitions. Except we have one. So let's say in the next 10, 15 years, we have another coalition. Let's say that House of Lords is reformed and we have proportional preferential voting for that. Voters get used to it. So one of the arguments against AV was people wouldn't understand it's too complicated. So I think over time, people might say, well, actually, we don't mind this, and perhaps we even think it's a bit better. And if turnout is low, that's another reason for going back. But it will take, if not a generation, it'll take a good while to go back to the voters and ask them again.
OK, moving on to what these changes in the political landscape mean for public affairs. What changes should those practising public affairs be considering in their planning? Is it true that Lib Dem ministers are being marginalised by their coalition partners? And if so, who should public affairs professionals be targeting?
I don't think, David, it changes much. Basically, we're all still getting used to coalition politics. It's a totally different modus operandi for those in government. It's a totally different modus operandi for those of us that are trying to influence public policy. Even if the coalition was to break down, we'd probably, the next likely scenario is we'd move to a Conservative minority administration. But the same thing holds true. Every public policy event has to be a decision. That was the big criticism of New Labour, that it was basically so for government. What we've had through a coalition is that every single part of the process has to be thought about. I don't think that's going to change after May.
I think the thing I would add is that, yes, in terms of the policy, the people, the personalities, they will change. The Lib Dems are doing themselves no favours by being so openly against the Conservatives around the cabinet table. And I think the behaviour of Vince Cable some months ago and Chris Huhne in recent days has left rather a lot to be desired in terms of that principle of, together in the national interest, which the coalition government was so proud of a year or so ago. But I think, from a politics point of view and policy point of view, absolutely every opportunity to still continue getting concessions, and the business of government will continue. There is an ambitious coalition agreement that still needs to be implemented, a Queen's speech in a year's time, and for those in the public affairs space, every opportunity to influence what goes in there, and perhaps even the legislation that's going to come out in the meantime.
And good public affairs people will be sitting down and saying, well, who are the stars who are coming up? Who should we be talking to? They should be talking to all three parties. So whatever happens, you still do your job and you do it well. So I agree absolutely with Iain and John. And I think, yes, there may be some changes, but, it is business as usual.
OK, we're almost out of time. Can we finish by each of you predicting Friday's headlines? Quick answer. 20 seconds from each of you. Start with John.
I would say that Wales, positive for Labour, Scotland, positive, SNP, Salmon hangs on, maybe with an increased majority. Good result for Labour in local elections, a very disappointing night for the Lib Dems in terms of locally, and obviously a resounding defeat for the Yes campaign in the AV referendum.
Can I do two? I think some people will do Lib Dems meltdown, and Jewish Chronicle will be AV Oive.
Be that.
I think it is a big no on the front page of the Sun, alongside, if I can say, tabloid Lib Dem wipeout. I really think we're going to see that across local government, which certainly looks like that's where they're heading in Scotland and in Wales. Not a good night for Lib Dems across the piece.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We're out of time. CIPR TV is back next month on the 2nd of June, when the subject will be diversity in the PR industry. It's a subject that asks a number of difficult questions, including how we can broaden the appeal of careers in the PR industry, ensure the widest possible access to opportunities, and ensure that we attract and retain the best talent. Until then, thanks for watching. Thanks to our panel, John, Simon and Iain, and thank you to the team at Marketeers 4DC. Goodbye.